And now as we come to today's very important opening, and the theme for this week's Governance Week, Governance in a Volatile World, you would have received the agenda a couple hours ago. Laura, if I may ask you, please post the agenda again in the chat for anyone who may not have received it, so they will get the full profiles of our speakers and panelists. As you will see from the agenda, we have greetings from our chairman, Robbie Rambarran, followed by brief remarks from our global ambassador, Professor Bob Garrett. Today, we deviate a bit from our past formats. Our main guest, Professor Henry Mintzberg, will be joining the panel discussion, which includes our panelists, Emile Leiba from Jamaica, Captain Jerry Gouveia from Guyana, Vanessa Yacoob from Suriname, and David Gomez from Belize, with our immediate past chairman, Nigel Romano, serving as moderator. And then over the next 5 days, we will be discussing the challenges and opportunities which this volatile world presents to our organizations. Those of you familiar with Governance Week would know that for the upcoming days, we have a different focus with an opening presenter followed by 3 panel discussions each day. So tomorrow, Monday, we look at relationship between management and governance. Tuesday, it's governance of the private sector. Wednesday, we look at governance of the state sector. Thursday, we focus on governance of family-owned businesses and SMEs. And we end on Friday, July 3rd, with the governance of groups and conglomerates. So you can expect a week of tremendous learning and insights from our speakers today and the 50+ panelists who will follow over the 5 days to come. We have detailed agendas prepared for each day, and these would be sent to you at the start of every day with the topics and profiles. Now, I will briefly introduce our recently installed chairman, Mr. Robbie Rambarran from Guyana, who will bring greetings on behalf of the board of the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute. So, Quantrell, as you highlight him on the screen, I will share that Robbie Rambarran is the Chief Executive Officer of Georgetown Public Hospital Corporation, which is Guyana's national hospital. He holds a master's in business administration and has served as a procurement specialist on World Bank and UNICEF-funded projects for the Ministry of Education. Robbie is heavily involved in sports administration and as such has served as a member and director of the Essequibo Cricket Board, the Pele Football Club, Guyana's Football Federation, and the Guyana Country Coordinating Mechanism Global Fund Board. He has served for 2 terms as a director of CCGI, and last month became the first chairman appointed to the board as chairman outside of Trinidad and Tobago. Robbie, I now hand over to you for your remarks.
Thank you, Kamala. Good afternoon, everyone. Please bear with me, I'm a little bit under the weather. CCGI Global Ambassador, Professor Bob Garrett, Professor Henry Mintzberg, Director of CCGI, our very own CEO, Ms. Kamala Ramkissoon de Silva. My predecessor, Nigel Romano, I also want to acknowledge the work that you have done for the Institute and continues to be a part of. Distinguished guests, esteemed speaker, members of the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute, representatives of government, business leader, regulators, academics, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to Governance Week 2026. It is my distinct pleasure on behalf of the Board of Directors and member of the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute to welcome you to this important gathering under the theme, Governance in a Volatile World. This theme could not be more timely. Across the globe, organizations are navigating unprecedented level of uncertainty, geopolitical tensions, economic instability, technological disruption, cybersecurity threats, climate-related risks, changing stakeholder expectations, and a rapid evolving regulatory landscape are testing the resilience of institutions in ways few would have imagined a decade ago. In such an environment, governance is no longer simply about compliance or oversight. It is about leadership. It is about resilience. It is about creating an organization that can anticipate change, adapt responsibly, and continue to create sustainable value for all stakeholders. The events of recent years have demonstrated that strong governance is not a luxury reserved for stable times. It is an essential requirement for navigating uncertainty. Organizations with effective board, clear accountability structures, sound risk management practice, and strong ethical culture are consistently better positioned to withstand shock and seize opportunities. For the Caribbean region, these challenges are especially significant. In small and open economies, we are often among the first to feel the effect of global disruption. Yet, we also possess unique strength, innovation, adaptability, entrepreneurship spirit, and deep appreciation for the importance of sustainable development. As governance professionals and leaders, we have a responsibility to ensure that our institutions, whether public, private, or non-for-profit, are equipped to meet the demands of this increasing complex environment. Good governance must remain the foundation upon which trust, transparency, accountability, and long-term prosperity are built. Over the course of this conference, we will engage with experts and practitioners who will share insights on emerging risks, board effectiveness, sustainability, digital transformation, regulatory development, and strategies for governing in time of uncertainty. I encourage each of you to participate actively, challenge conventional thinking, and take full advantage of the opportunity for learning and collaboration. Governance Week has become an important platform for advancing governance excellence throughout the Caribbean. Its success reflects the commitment of our members, partners, sponsors, speakers, and participants who recognize that effective governance is critical to economic growth, investor confidence, and institutional integrity and social well-being. I wish to express my sincere appreciation to our conference planning committee, led by our CEO, our sponsors and partners, and all those who work hard and dedicated have made this event possible. We are grateful for your continued support to the Institute mission to promote and strengthen governance standards across the region. As we begin this year's conference, let us remember that while volatility may be beyond our control, the quality of our governance is not. Strong governance provides the compass that helps organizations navigate uncertainty, maintain public trust, and achieve their strategic objectives, even in the most challenging circumstances. I am confident that the discussion we will have over the coming days will generate valuable insights and practical solutions that will strengthen our institution and contribute to a more resilient Caribbean. Thank you for joining us. I wish you a productive and engaging, successful Governance Week Conference 2026. It is now my absolute pleasure to officially declare Governance Week 2026 open. Thank you. May God bless us all.
Thank you so much, Robbie. And I'm so sorry you're not feeling well.
That's
I'm
okay.
grateful that you still felt well enough to come and speak to us today for the opening of Governance Week. And I like many of the points that you made, specifically with respect to the role of the NGO sector. I know Professor Mintzberg refers to these as the plural sector. So we look forward to his thoughts on the emerging risks that we see happening and what we may need to rebalance our societies for the social well-being that you spoke of. And I hope very much, Robbie, that you would be well enough to serve as our opening presenter for tomorrow's day one of Governance Week.
I will be.
And now I would like to invite someone very near and dear to us at CCGI, and therefore someone who really needs no introduction. Our global ambassador, Professor Bob Garrett, is a global powerhouse, and he's the person behind much of CCGI's success over the last 6 years. He was our opening keynote for our inaugural Governance Week in 2020, when the world moved online due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Since then, he has been instrumental in broadening our perspectives and networking us with some of the world's thought leaders in governance. He was instrumental in us contacting Professor Mintzberg for today's opening. I want to share that Professor Garrett recently published his latest book, Building Intelligent Boards, which offers a new perspective on corporate governance. This is a book that belongs in the hand of everyone who is interested in improving corporate governance practices. And so I'm committing that we would purchase a copy of this book for every member of CCGI who is a member as of today's date. And if we are able to get the shipment on time, the books will be distributed at our end of year event to be held in November this year. Professor Garrett, it is always such a great pleasure to have you. And now I invite you to share your thoughts at the start of Governance Week 2026.
Thank you, Kamala. And greetings from a hot and sticky London this evening. And thank you for plugging the book. I wasn't expecting that. Very helpful. But the book actually deals with the title of this particular conference. So it's looking at this notion of the volatile world. And it's, I call it the polycrises, which boards are now going to have to face simultaneously. So not only are we going to have to deal with, if you like, the internal workings of the board, the finance, marketing, all those aspects, but we now have to work out how on earth to deal with the very lists, which I won't repeat, that Robbie has just given us, all around all the cyber issues and all the environmental and political issues which are facing us. The book is in two halves. The second half is very much about how we deal with the polycrises. I'm not going to go into that in any detail at all, I promise. But the first half of the book is very much restating the basis of the notion of corporate governance. And what's shocked me in the few weeks since the book has been released is the number of people who've come up to me. And here I'm talking about very senior people in very senior directorial positions in government, in business, and in the charity sector, and said, you know, at the beginning of the book, you list 16 myths about corporate governance relating to the common law. But you know, I hardly got any of those myths right. And on the cover of the book, Professor Mike Mainelli, previously Lord Mayor of the City of London, actually says what Bob's book is beginning to expose is that most people in directorial positions around the world are winging it. They don't honestly know everything they're meant to be doing. And at the moment, there's no great pressure for them to learn how to do that. So in listening every night for the next 6 nights into the conference, I shall be trying to do two things. One, look at the notion of what is it we're learning from the conference which will be of great immediate use to the next generation of directors? Because it's that next generation that will have to deal with the poly crises, whether they like it or not. But the other thing that worries me, and it really has shaken me rigid in the last few days, is the things that have been bubbling on the internet, but are now becoming made manifest in the United States, and specifically in California about 3 weeks ago, and in Texas 2 weeks ago. The idea that in future, the AI agent can become a legal entity in its own right. So the AI agent can replace directors in terms of making contracts and making financial decisions. Now, I don't know about you, but that scares the hell out of me, and it seems to be an existential threat to the future of corporate governance as we know it. So this is something we must fight, and that's what I'll also be looking for over the next 6 nights, because I think that really is something so profound, we must oppose it. So what do we do for the next generation, and how do we fight the notion that the agent, the AI agent, can become a legal entity? On that cheery note, I shall hand back to Kamla.
Thank you very much, Professor Garrett. And I know that what you have raised there is a very key point, since we continue to grapple with what it means for a company to be a legal entity and
Yes.
sometimes hold liability. So now, as you say, this issue of the AI becoming a legal entity, and the fact, as you point out, that this could be an existential threat for corporate governance is something we need to pay very, very close attention to. And I agree with you. It's so important that what we do, we continue to have reflection, and we consider what truly are we leaving for the next generation.
Yeah.
Thank you
Thank you
very much. And now, as we have heard those words of wisdom from Professor Garrett, we come to that moment that most of you have been waiting for, which is the contribution of our panelists and our key panelist for today, Professor Henry Mintzberg. To take charge of this afternoon's panel is our moderator, Nigel Romano. Nigel, as all of you may know, is one of our founding directors of CCGI and our immediate past chairman. He is a chartered accountant with extensive experience in public accounting and banking across the globe, serving with Citibank for 15 years in Asian countries, including Indonesia, Hong Kong, Singapore, and the Philippines. He retired as Managing Director of JMMB, Trinidad and Tobago Limited, and currently serves on several boards. He has performed this role of moderator for all of our previous opening ceremonies for Governance Week. And so it is with great pleasure that I put the rest of today's opening ceremony in his hands. Nigel, the virtual floor is now yours.
Thank you, Kamla, for that kind introduction. And thank you to our chairman, Mr. Robbie Rambarran, and our global ambassador, Professor Bob Garrett, for setting the stage this evening. To our participants, we have about 44% of them online right now, but I understand that we have over 138 registered for the week. Our members, partners, and friends are very warm welcome. This year's theme, Governance in a Volatile World, could not be more timely. For those of us in the Caribbean, volatility is not theoretical. It arrives as climate shocks, supply chain disruption, foreign exchange constraints, shifting trade agreements, geopolitical uncertainty, the acceleration of the use of artificial intelligence, and the constant challenge of building resilient institutions in small, open economies. Our topic this evening is mindset for volatility. Notice that word, mindset. We begin not with compliance checklists or risk matrices, important as those are, but with the harder question. How must boards and leaders think when the old assumptions no longer hold? Tonight, we'll hear from some of our Caribbean leaders and Professor Mintzberg's response. We are especially honored this evening to be joined live from Montreal by one of the most influential management thinkers of our time. Professor Henry Mintzberg is the Cleghorn Professor of Management Studies at the Volatile Faculty of Management at McGill University. After earning his doctorate at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, he made McGill his professional home. He's the author of 21 books, a body of work that has earned him 21 honorary degrees and an officership in the Order of Canada. And he writes a much-loved blog, a collection of which was published as bedtime stories for managers. For decades, Professor Mintzberg has challenged us to move beyond the myth of the heroic executive and beyond the illusion that strategy is merely what is written in a plan. He gave us the idea of emergent strategy, that effective strategy is often learned through action and adaptation, not dictated from above. And in recent years, he has called for what he terms the communityship, the recognition that organizations endure through sense-making, distributed across the whole, not heroic leadership at the top. He has even turned his eye on boards themselves, reminding us that they are necessary but problematic, and that their first duty is to acquire an acute sense of what they don't know. Professor, we are thrilled to have you in this conversation. We will come to you shortly, but first I want to draw out the lived experience of 4 leaders from 4 corners of our region and invite you to respond and build on what you hear. So our first panelist is Emile Leiba from Jamaica. He's the president of the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce and the immediate former managing partner of the firm Duncock, a former president of the Jamaica Bar Association. Emile brings more than 23 years as an attorney in employment, commercial, and maritime law, appearing in the courts at every level up to the Privy Council. He's the first appointed chairman of Jamaica's Disabilities Tribunal, a director of the Planning Institute of Jamaica, and a former marathon runner and triathlete. So he understands endurance in more ways than one. Captain Gerald Gouveia joins us from Guyana. He's the chairman of the Private Sector Commission of Guyana, a licensed airline transport pilot and former military officer. Captain Gouveia is the director of aviation and security and chief pilot of the Roraima Group. His career has taken him from international runways to Guyana's most remote jungle airstrips, often flying life-saving night medevac missions. A certified ICAO safety auditor and emergency management professional, he now leads Guyana's foremost business advocacy body during a historic period of growth. Then we have Vanessa Yacoob from Suriname. She's the co-founder and director of Sheriff Consultancy and has served for more than 16 years in the energy sector across 10 countries. She coordinated Statsoli's first refinery turnaround following its expansion, helped establish Guyana's first internationally accredited oil and gas training center, founded Caribbean Energy Week, and is Suriname's first female PhD candidate in oil and gas management. And last but not least, we have David Gomez. He's the practice lead at Launchpad Consulting and a director of the Rambarran Institute. David is a governance and strategy specialist who has spent more than 25 years advising governments, multilateral organizations, and boards across the Commonwealth. He coordinated the review of governance arrangements at the Commonwealth Secretariat, has led governance assessments for numerous Caribbean regional institutions, and serves on the Harvard Business Review Advisory Council. He is program director of the MBA program and associate professor at Richmond American University in London. So, we will open with Emile, and Emile, we welcome your comments.
All right. Good evening, afternoon, everyone, depending on your time zone. Thanks very much for having me, to our moderator, and of course to my good friend Kamla, and of course my fellow panelists. Conversations of this nature have become much more dynamic, I would say, in the current dispensation than they perhaps were previously. So from the Jamaican perspective, I'm by no means the professional in these areas that, I'm looking forward to hearing the professor speak. From the Jamaican perspective, we are in a post-Hurricane Melissa environment. We are in a global fuel crisis environment, and we are dealing with certain, let's call it governance issues within government right now, or ourselves. So there are a lot of areas that really come to the fore. But one of the areas I think that I would want to highlight that perhaps falls short in the region is that from personal experience I've seen, we write policies. So they're the companies, businesses in Jamaica. I want to give a different perspective. So you have the entrepreneurs who are just starting out, who don't have a written policy. Then they grow, they hopefully secure funding for you experienced professionals, and they formulate a policy. They may do one training session. Then they may grow. They don't necessarily update those policies. And then the businesses get to a certain size where they may well have policies in place, but may not be the right fit for the size that they are now. Because one of the important issues in governance that I've seen is keeping things on a constant and periodic review to ensure that it still matches with what you are really dealing with as a business. So in Jamaica right now, you would need to have in place a data protection policy that's not required by law. You have to have in place a prevention against sexual harassment policy. That is also required by law. And of course, it is strongly recommended that you would have in place general policies regarding disciplinary policy with employment disputes, etc. But what I want to focus on is the implementation and the applicability of these policies. So these policies are written, these policies are put in place, but how are they working in practice? So we had the experience of the Jamaica Broilers case, which is one of our largest manufacturers, who established one of our few Caribbean entities that exported to the US. So they opened another entity in the US. Now, my knowledge of this case is only anecdotal from media reports, so I don't have any inside information on it, but certainly how it was reported is in essence that their funds, their accounts had to be redone. It did not reflect accurately what was happening within the company, and to a very significant degree. So a company that at first appeared to be very profitable, etc., now it created, was reclassified basically as being a company that was struggling, and was having significant challenges. And so some of these issues, again, which are a bit unclear in terms of how they were reported, but certainly seem to boil down to governance issues between the management In the American entity, that was replaced in full, as I understand it, as well as the auditing firm, which was changed. So these are two facts: that the management was changed, the auditing firm was changed. And so when you look at that, doesn't seem that there was a lack of policy there, but how were they applying their policy? How was management being a check and balance with the auditor, and the auditor being a check and balance for management? And so in my experience, what I've seen, good governance, good corporate governance really only works properly and effectively when you have good checks and balances between the entities and various stakeholders. So when you're an entrepreneur, when you start out, you're really your own boss, your own auditor, your own everything, right? But then again, it's only your own money, you've just started out. But when it is that you are growing, and sometimes these companies become listed on the stock exchange and so on, you now have responsibilities to shareholders, you now have responsibilities to your regulators and your other entities and broad owners. And it really, begs the question in the current space, are we doing enough to properly ensure that we apply policies? In my own business, we just recently had a presentation about AI policy and AI and streamlining it. Because the reality of AI in businesses now is that everybody's using it individually, but they're not using it in a corporate way in many places. They're not, and so there's no single standard. There's no single controls, no single systems regarding how they're applied. And so what I would say for those who are observing, in looking at your corporate governance for your business, you should ensure that you put in place scheduling so it is periodically reviewed with a professional. And you should also ensure that in conducting that review, it is fit for purpose and that it manages the practices that are happening on the ground. Because when you have a mismatch between those things, when your policies are not properly updated, what you can find is that you have these issues which arise, but then you're not able to act on them. You're not able to enforce them. And then it is a fact that if you have to be disciplining people, a lot of times that means that you have actually gone too far. You should be able to try and get to the point where you no longer have to. All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's hear from Captain Gouveia.
Thank you very
Emile?
much, sir.
I
Yes.
mean, Jerry.
Yes, I appreciate it, sir. Thank you. When we start to think about what's going on in the global sphere, we have to start managing with a regional mindset at the very least. And what I mean by that is we have to start thinking about how do we create security in our own supply chain. And the only way to really do that is to start thinking regionally. So the push that we are seeing here in Guyana is that we're all thinking about energy security, data security, food security, because these things have significant impact in our own supply chain management. So when we start thinking about our governance structures and how we are organizing our business community, we are thinking now regional because, we can't have something that happens across the world derail our entire economic stability. That's what we've seen in the past, in the very recent past. So how do we start to insulate our own governance structures to create that level of security in our own supply chains regionally? And that comes a lot to do with how do we collaborate across borders? How do we ensure that our systems in Guyana can integrate and be interoperable with the systems in Jamaica, with the systems in Suriname? So that way we start to create one economy, one set of supply chain that is now starting to insulate this region from a supply chain level as well as a corporate governance level. So that way we don't have to start worrying as much on global shifts. And that's something that we don't have in this region at all. most of what we use in this region is imported into the region. Very little, even if we do have manufacturing and growing capabilities in the region. And this is starting to create massive opportunities of destabilization for individual companies. And that is something that we have to start taking into consideration as companies, as business organizations. How do we insulate against that? And then the governance structures that happen around there need to now start to grow. So on the boards and on these business organizations, we cannot continue to look internally. We always have to now start looking externally and making sure that we're interoperable, because as the globalization move is happening, we have to start kind of counteracting that mindset and start thinking as insulating the region, and that protects us against global shifts. So I would like to kind of start by exploring that a little bit, in the sense that how do we really start to align our companies' phytosanitary protocols with governments that can't agree? So how do we start to engage with the governments? How do we speak with the CPSO, for example, to make sure that they can finally pass through a unified SPS program? These are things that we have to start looking at, not just our internal corporate governance, but regional corporate governance. And that has to be, we have to interact with the regional governments. We have to interact with regional regulatory bodies and international and regional companies. So when you start thinking that way, you have to start opening up your company for international best practice. You have to start training your systems to be international standards. Adopting ISO makes things very easy because we're all on the same page. So these are some of the ways that we need to start thinking on a regional level and start adopting regional standards on corporate governance. So I'll pause there because I want the discussion to continue.
Thank you, Jerry. Ms. Yacoob, the floor is now yours.
Good evening, everyone. For some of you, perhaps it's good afternoon. This is my first time joining the Governance Week, and it's both an honor and privilege to address this gathering from Suriname perspective. Thank you to the CEO of the Governance Week, and very warm welcome as well to everyone that's joining, as well to both professors, Mintzberg and Professor Grant. From a Suriname perspective, I can say the world, it's nothing new. The world is currently experiencing unprecedented change. There is lots of discussions on economic uncertainty, climate change, etc. From Suriname, a small but diversified nation, speaking from our country, which is located on the northern coast of South America, the realities are deeply familiar. Our history has taught us the resilience in most merely the ability to withstand changes, but at the end, wisdom to adapt, innovate, and move forward together. Suriname pursues sustainable development and economic transportation, particularly through new opportunities. For example, our energy sector, our agriculture, and more overall, our environmental stewardship. We recognize prosperity that must be built on sound governance. Natural wealth does not come alone just like that, or does not guarantee progress for the quality of the institution. The integrity of our leadership and participation of the citizens is the future that we create, and that is very important. For some of you that may know, but our country is perhaps one of the most multicultural heritage that offers different types of lessons within the world. The strength of Suriname lies within the diversify, what we have and what we share with different types of communities, culture, and tradition. In terms of remaining one of our greatest asset, foundation of inclusive governance is something that is still a bit of concern in Suriname. We talk about economic instability and public trust, which is something that we still have been coping with. Suriname has experienced in the past 2 decades, as I can recall, high inflation, currency depreciation, and public debt, which is currently still in the way and process of restructuring. These are things that in strong institution needs to build on, and also it's something that needs to maintain trust during economic reform. Secondly, we have our managing the new oil opportunities. Apart from Guyana, Suriname is now facing a very promising future. Suriname has experienced recent a huge offshore resource, which will bring us approximately around $26 billion in revenue, but perhaps more in the pipeline. This is something that we are still trying to cope with on how we will manage the revenue. There are still lots of institutions in place, such as the Natural Resource Wealth Fund, Revenue Management System, and also a local debt office that manages the wealth and benefit of the citizens, because that's what we want at the end of the day. We don't want the wealth just like what others would say. We want to prevent the curse. We will want everyone to benefit from the wealth, and not just a selected few, because we have seen that in many countries and many places where the governance and the entire structure, which is always mismanaged, that you see exactly what happens. Very selective few of the group, we would say, or individuals or companies that are participating would benefits from that. And this brings us to accountability and transparent management, which is something we are still fighting with. We're there, but we have to figure it out. But I'm sure we will get there. Climate and environmental governance is also something we need to look into. As most people know, Suriname is one of the most, or the only country in the world with 94% carbon negative, balancing the economic development and the rainforest conservation. That's something that needs to be done, from my perspective, with the indigenous tribal communities, business, and international partners, and having a good structure and an institution that manages that. That's something that we really are missing and lacking. There have been many discussions going on about this, but it is something that I think that needs to be done cooperative, and that's what we're actually lacking. For the last, that brings me to social and political volatility. That's something that I think public protests and social tensions arising from economic hardship demonstrate the importance of responsive governance. So government must engage citizens, explain policy choices, and create mechanism, meaningful public participation. That is something we have been battling with in the last 3 years. We have different types of institution, like moving on to local content and others, but the public participation is lacking. There is no structure, and that's something we can learn from our neighboring countries who are like more mature in these, like Trinidad, Jamaica, Guyana, who has been very well. I would say we can take an example from. And at the end, for us, it's increasingly depends on effective international partnership and multilateral cooperation. Therefore, I believe that commitment to governance that is resilient, participatory, and sustainable, it's something that we need to listen before it acts. So in other words, we need governance that acts, listens before it acts, and the plan beyond the electrical cycle, and places the human dignity, future generation at the center of the decision making. So which brings us to Suriname. Again, we're at a pivotal point in emerging sector, and it's the first time in our history, in the last 3 decades, we have a government administrative that has been formed with 6 coalition parties instead of 2 ruling parties, which brings us to the point that there is not enough room for collaboration and interaction within institutions that are private as well, governmental connected. And that's something that we can learn from, especially from our neighbors, to strengthen our institution, invest in our people alongside everything else, because that's the opportunity to transform the wealth into lasting development. Thank you. That's from my side.
Thank you, Vanessa. Mr. Gomez, please share your perspective with us.
Thanks, Nigel, and for moderating this panel. And to my fellow panelists for their insightful contributions to the dialogue. I think, as everyone before me has pointed out, for organizations in Caribbean, one of the defining governance challenges in this period of volatility is that I think I understand I'm saying that success increasingly depends not only on what happens inside the boardroom, but also on the quality of the relationship between business and government. And Jerry kind of emphasized that, underscored that when he was talking. So Caribbean economies are small, open, and highly exposed to all of the external shocks, the hurricanes, the global inflation, the geopolitical tension, supply chain disruptions, and now the rapid evolution of artificial intelligence. And these all have profound implications for both governments and businesses, especially at their intersection, where they intersect. So, because neither can manage the threats alone or the risks alone, and no single institution can manage these. So I want to use that as a starting point to elevate the discussion from perhaps how should boards manage risks to how should boards govern in an ecosystem. Because in my opinion, the biggest governance challenge is that the risks organizations in the region face are no longer organizational, they're systemic. In other words, the Caribbean's governance challenge is that our risks are systemic, but our governance, I believe, remains institutional. So there's kind of a misalignment there. And let me try to speak briefly about a couple of the challenges that I think that are symptoms of that and bring out that systemic tension for organizations. The first is governing amid policy uncertainty. So in this volatile world, governments are under pressure to respond quickly to inflation, geopolitical tensions, trade disruptions, natural disasters. But policy responses like changes in taxation, trade policy, foreign exchange arrangements, environmental standards can and have significantly altered business decisions. Inevitably, businesses have to react to what governments are doing. At the same time, governments seem to be under pressure to drive more private investment for growth and recovery, and to respond to external influences about trade, etc. And this creates a governance challenge because boards can no longer treat public policy as something external to business. I heard Jerry allude to that when he was talking, and he's right. Because companies must anticipate and engage with it, and where appropriate, help shape it through constructive dialogue. So I think one of the clearest examples of this in our region is Barbados when it was undergoing its economic recovery program following the, I think, 2018 financial crisis. Barbados was faced with unsustainable public debt and declining investor confidence. And so the government undertook significant fiscal reforms under the Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation Program, the BERT program, which was supported by the IMF, I think. And for businesses in Barbados, this was more than a macroeconomic adjustment. It changed the operating environment. There were changes to taxation, to public expenditure. There was debt restructuring, and the broader economic landscape changed for business. So boards suddenly had to reassess investment decisions, cash flow assumptions, even workforce planning and growth strategies. So I think this illustrates an important governance lesson. That public policy is no longer something that boards can afford to monitor from a distance, especially in periods of volatility. Fiscal policy, regulatory reform, and national economic strategy have become strategic governance issues because they directly shape business resilience. the most effective organizations were not in Barbados, were not simply those that reacted to policy changes. They were the ones that anticipated the change and constructively engaged with the government and regulators. There's another lesson there, though, and I think that while the reforms in Barbados undoubtedly required direct or difficult adjustments, they were intended to restore macroeconomic stability and improve fiscal stability. And that reminds us that governments and business may have different short-term pressures, but they often share the same long-term objectives of creating stable environments for sustainable growth. So the governance challenge, therefore, is not simply responding to government policy, it is developing governance structures that enable organizations to adapt to policy uncertainty while contributing to national economic resilience, especially again in periods of volatility. So that is one. Another, I think, is balancing short-term pressures with long-term development. So governments, this is a matter of political time horizons or business time horizons. For governments or for political parties, they have short-term horizon. It is a systemic issue across the region. So because many of the investments that make our economies resilient are precisely those that are hardest to justify in the short term. Renewable energy transitions, as Vanessa was talking about, climate adaptation, as Emile mentioned, education and workforce development, I think, is also one. Retooling our workforce to be able to operate effectively in this new environment. The digital infrastructure, and for much of the Caribbean, modernizing our maritime and airports. So these are pressing challenges, but they require investments over decades, not over short-term 3 to 5 year political periods. And that's why governance matters, because good boards and good governments must both be willing to look beyond just the immediate pressures for short-term gains and towards creating long-term value. But governments across the region still tend to be focused on those 5 year electoral cycles, while businesses face pressure for quarterly or annual performance. The part of the challenge there is that a lot of businesses tend to align with one political party or the other, and they make their buck, so to speak, or their money, so to speak, when the favored party is in power, or they lose a bit of it when they're not. But boards have to be able to rise above that, because they have I think, in my view, an important role in resisting the excessive short-termism that seems to pervade the Caribbean region. So, but this requires boards and directors and people in managing the governance of organizations to ask not only if measures will create value next year, but also whether it would strengthen organizations and the societies over the next decade or the next couple of decades. So what can organizations do? Well, first, I think it's important to strengthen the public-private dialogue and to build policy intelligence into governance. That's something that's desperately needed. Building strategic relationship with government and strengthening engagement with them should occur not only when organizations want regulatory relief or from financial incentives, or they want some other favor to be done, but boards should encourage regular constructive engagement that focuses on shared national priorities and evidence-based policy making. So many organizations I know monitor competitors closely, but devote very little attention to emerging policy risks, and that's a big area. The second one, and that's one I want to emphasize strongly today, is that organizations need to adopt a stewardship mindset and to evaluate decisions over a longer time horizon, 10 to 20 years, whatever is appropriate for them, and not just next reporting or political cycles. Politics, markets often reward short-term results, but resilience, the type that we need, especially for global challenges of renewable energy, climate change, and AI readiness, requires decades. I guess what I'm saying here is that boards are no longer simply guardians of shareholder value. We're no longer operating in this single bottom line context where the only stakeholder group that matters are shareholders and the only focus of organizations is in profitability. But boards must understand how their role in managing organizations to deliver effective triple bottom line approaches where they consider and are able to deliver positive social and environmental impacts. In the Caribbean context, organizations are also stewards of institutions that contribute to employment, social stability, national development, environment. So boards should ask, how does our success contribute to the resilience of countries? And I think there are a few companies across the region who have done well in that. Republic Financial Holdings have consistently invested in enterprise risk management. Sagicor has embedded enterprise risk into its governance framework. As a regional insurer, I think it continues to evaluate climate risk, demographic trends. Grace Kennedy is often cited for integrating governance with long-term strategic planning and has diversified geographically and across industries while investing very heavily in leadership development and succession. And I think Massey also demonstrates its own governance through diversification. I really like the Massey case. They're operating across retail, distribution, energy, finance, and motors means that the board has to regularly evaluate geopolitical, supply, and climate risk across multiple markets. I think for these companies, rather than relying on one market or one sector, governance has focused on resilience through diversification. In closing, I think it's important to point out for me that Caribbean governance or governance in the Caribbean region is fundamentally different from governance in larger economies. In small island developing states like those in our region, business leaders, public officials often know one another personally, and sectors are concentrated, and the same institutions repeatedly collaborate during crises. This closeness is one that can be a source of strength for us, enabling rapid coordination during disasters. And I think I heard one of the other speakers mention that tonight. But it also requires careful governance to preserve the transparency, accountability, and public trust that's so important in this process. In a volatile role, fragmented governance, governance, in my view, becomes a competitive disadvantage. So we need to stay away from that. Back to you.
Thank you, David. So, Professor Mintzberg, you've now heard from four leaders, and they have described the volatility as they live it. We heard about policy risk and formulation and implementation, and the disconnect sometimes between policy and purpose, supply chain as a regional risk, the need for responsible governance from a national point of view, and given in this case of Suriname and Guyana, the recent oil and gas discoveries and the impact. And then, of course, we heard about relationships between business, government, and I might add, labor. So, what strikes you and what would you challenge or build on as we think about the mindset boards need for a volatile world?
I'm reminded of Woody Allen, who once said, I have an answer, who has a question? Because as I listen, I'm not sure how I can bring all these perspectives together, except in a kind of broad way. David and Vanessa, maybe easier for me that what I want to say will kind of relate more to them. What strikes me first is I wonder if you want to call the conference Lack of Governance, Hence a Volatile World. Because I'm not sure what governance is in this volatile world, or a different way to put it is whether we have the governance we have creates a volatile world. For example, I agree with much of what David said in terms of intention. But if you're running a company that's on the stock market, how do you take a long-term perspective when you're reporting earnings quarterly, or worse, if you're private equity controlled, how do you take a long-term perspective? So it's necessary, and we need to take a long-term perspective. So you might say, well, we take a long-term perspective by entrepreneurs who control the companies and who are governance. I mean, who governs Musk? Who governs Bezos? Who governs Zuckerberg? They have boards, I assume, but not sure Musk is exactly taking orders from his board, who are instructing him to, pay himself into the billions of dollars of remuneration. So if we have a choice between, I mean, these are all publicly traded companies too, but the founders have a lot of power. So I'm not sure who's governing who in the private sector. While I 100% agree with taking long-term perspective and opening up the perspective of corporations, that's not what I see. I see it on the part of responsible entrepreneurs. But I don't see, as soon as they do an IPO and go public, it's extremely difficult for them to take a long-term perspective. They have to keep feeding the beast every quarter. And if they don't show progress on shareholder value every quarter, um, they're in trouble. And God knows what the conversations are with private equity, let alone with the stock market, let alone with stock market analysts. So this kind of brings me to a broader issue, which is governance in a much broader sense, which is who is governing this world. And the closest answer is three autocrats are governing this world. We have three superpowers, each of whom is controlled by a single individual, um, each of whom is certainly not concerned with the future of the world. Maybe China is more concerned with climate change. That's good for them. But the governance of China is not exactly democratic, nor is the governance of Russia democratic, nor is the governance of the United States. Well, they call it democratic. It's not democratic at all. And by that, I don't mean it's Republican. I mean it's anti-democratic. Trump is taking apart democracy one step at a time. Um, so this is the world we live in. And 10 years ago, I published this, Rebalancing Society, and you'll notice there's a circle here that says public-private plural, because my conclusion at that point was that we are stuck, the democracies, forget the autocracies, the democracies are stuck in a kind of left-right pendulum politics, that we swing between control of government by government and control by business. So Britain was, business was totally in control. Britain swings the other way. It doesn't swing far enough for some people, so now they get rid of their prime minister so they can swing farther to the left, and so on. And the center is there's no center. The center is paralyzed in many democracies. In America, the center is paralyzed right now. I don't know what the center would be in Russia or China, but in Britain, the center seems to be paralyzed in some ways, and as it swings the other way now. And so I wrote that book to say that a healthy society balances three sectors. It's not two-sector politics, it's three-sector society. And the two sectors, well enough, are public and private. But I think there's a third sector, which I mentioned earlier, which is called civil society, or it's got all kinds of names. But I call it the plural sector because it comprises communities, community activity, and NGOs, and so on, that are plural in the sense that there are a huge variety of organizations, and I call them plural because the sector has to be seen to take its place alongside public and private. So we don't have governments in the world. We have three superpowers via the whole world, which is becoming totally necessary. We have three superpowers vying for control, like a bunch of gangs in a schoolyard, basically, no different. And they'll destroy each other, or else they'll destroy us if we continue with that. We can't persist with superpowers, but nobody is challenging superpowers. So how do you correct this? So this book was essentially about diagnosing what's the problem, and I did a imbalance because the community sector, the plural sector, the amazing success of the United States going back 200 years or 250 years now, the amazing success of the United States was actually as much plural sector community as it was business sector, private sector business. In the sense that America had very, very strong communal organizations. And if you read de Tocqueville, who wrote about democracy in America in the 1830s, he described essentially what we call today NGOs, who were very, very influential. But community has suffered a terrible demise in this past century, mostly I think because the new technologies, all the new technologies have driven us farther and farther into our individualistic selves. Individualism runs rampant in much of the world, led by the liberal democracies, which have become too liberal and not sufficiently democratic, namely Britain and the United States. And community has suffered. So the automobile came along, so we didn't walk on the streets anymore. We wrapped ourselves in a hunk of metal. And so we lost that community connection. And then radio and television came along, so we could get entertained at home. So we didn't have to go out and meet our colleagues. And then when the telephone came along, we didn't knock on people's door anymore. We called them up. And then the internet came along, and now we walk around. All of us walk around on the streets like this, bumping into each other, if we're walking on the streets at all. So we've closed totally in on ourselves. We've destroyed or damaged the sense of community, and pardon the expression, we need some kind of governance. We need some kind of institutional arrangements that will bring us back to our senses. And I think that has to start in the community sector, in the plural sector. In other words, it doesn't start with elites. Everything I've been hearing today is about the elites. You're not using that term, but basically the elites in positions of governance, whether they're on boards of, whether they're elected politicians or on boards of corporations. But if you look at the kind of social change, models of social change that we need, the model I go back to is Martin Luther. Martin Luther was a nobody. He was an obscure monk in an obscure German town who put a rant of one page on a church and changed Christianity forever. And how did that happen? Well, his students took this one page down and they used the new social medium of the time, which was the printing press, and they printed something like 200,000 copies within a short period of time as an attack on the corruption of the papacy, and it changed the religion. To me, that's kind of a model. You start an obscure place, you have some kind of spark. People are very angry, the way they were in Eastern Europe when they brought down the wall in Berlin. People were very angry. They moved, and you create kind of a new sense of the world, public, private, plural, in balance, but business, government, community imbalance. And my prime minister is the only one I know who talking about the middle powers, although you might want to talk about the smaller powers with good reason, about the middle powers. So let me just say one last thing. The Economist does a ranking of a democratic index for every country in the world. and they all get ranked according to, they all get ranked and they fall into either full democracies, flawed democracies, hybrid regimes, or autocracies. Now, this is a message for the Caribbean, maybe, because most of the countries that are full democracies are tiny. The first 5 or 6 are all tiny. They're all the Scandinavian countries and New Zealand are always in the top. You've got Costa Rica sort of up high in democracy. Botswana has been an example. Uruguay has been an example. And the biggest country in that list is Japan, which is the 11th largest country in the world. So the 10 largest countries in the world are not democracies, including the United States, which comes out as a flawed democracy. So this idea of middle powers, I prefer smaller powers, or I prefer balanced countries, countries that balance their democracy across business, government, and community. And that means I make a strong pitch. I don't think anybody mentioned it for the social economy, for social enterprises, not just business doesn't just have to be private enterprises. Business can be social enterprises. Cooperatives are businesses and do well in certain places, in Mondragon in Spain and John Lewis Partnership in Britain and so on, are very effective cooperatives. So maybe I'll stop there. But that's sort of my call. I don't think I want to mention any other points. No, I guess I'm
Thank you.
just going to
Thank you
say
very much.
one quick thing that
Mhm.
the second stage was a website called rebalansingsociety.org, which is available. You can look at it, which was sort of second stage, what to do about it. And now I'm writing a pamphlet called Balance Now for the Sake of Survival, and it's got 3 parts. Part number one, sort of what's wrong, and that's climate change and wealth distribution and so on. Why it's wrong, and that's imbalance as the common cause, whether it's imbalance of ourselves, our societies, our organizations, the world. And the third part is how to change it, which is this idea of reformation.
Thank you very much. First, let me ask the panel if they have any questions, or if any of the audience has any questions for Dr. Mintzberg.
Yes. And just to give a very quick time check, Nigel, I'm so sorry, we just have 10 more minutes.
Yes,
So
I know.
our panelists keep it very brief and quick, okay?
Yeah.
So, Nigel,
David,
I just had one quick question for Professor
go ahead.
Do you think that perhaps organizations can achieve the objective through the value proposition? I do understand that companies have to focus on the profit line, but could it be that governance that speaks to managing the value proposition over a longer term, could that be kind of an approach that would work?
Well, if community was a factor in their decision making, because every corporation is dependent on community in several senses. Number one, a strong business is a community. People like to work there. They appreciate it. They're respected, and the company respects them. So there's that sense of community. Then there's the community around them, which they serve and also have to be responsible to in terms of how they treat people and how they treat customers and how they treat suppliers. And then, of course, there's the global issue of it. We all have to deal with climate change and so on. So the answer is yes, if community can play a role. Right now, it doesn't. It's completely excluded, with exceptions. With exceptions, in co-ops, there may be a sense of responding to whoever owns the place, whether it's customers or suppliers or workers.
Emile, did you have anything to add?
Yes. Thanks, Professor Mintzberg, for a very comprehensive presentation. In terms of the way forward, where the world as you have set it out, do you see where the change within environments should be more achieved better achieved by legislative change, meaning that should government step in and create a framework for enterprises to better work together within the existing framework? Or is it better left to individual companies to make their decisions as to how best to operate in this world of competing powers?
Neither.
Okay.
Neither. Legitimate change implies that the establishment will fix a broken establishment. And I just don't think that's going to happen. Because people in positions of authority, who may be perfectly responsible people, are beholden to the establishment the way it is now. I'm not calling for violent revolution or anything like that. But the establishment will not fix the establishment. I don't think Bezos or Musk is going to fix the United States, let alone Trump. The individual corporations will not. I'll give you an example. The popular solution for the United States is what I call adjectival capitalism. I have found 18 versions of fixing capitalism, creative capitalism, and this, my favorite is democratic capitalism. It's not capitalist democracy, it's democratic capitalism. There are 18 versions of these things you can find on my website. If you look up on my blog, if you look up adjectival capitalism, you can see this whole list. Corporations are not going to solve the problem, but they certainly have important roles to play in contributing to it. It will start with a groundswell of people who are fed up the way they were in Martin Luther's time, or the way they were in Eastern Europe when they brought down the Berlin Wall. It starts as a groundswell of people who say enough corruption, enough awful distribution of wealth. We've got to correct that. It won't come from establishment positions, I don't think. That doesn't mean establishment people don't have a role to play. One last comment. I have a kind of a framework in this new pamphlet. And I say, kind of, who are we talking about? Who's in this world? And I say, we have the filthy rich. Somebody actually mentioned that already. We have the filthy rich and the dirt poor. Okay, we have the Musks, whoever, the filthy rich and the dirt poor. Okay, but in between we have the comfortable and the beleaguered. Okay, the comfortable are people like me and you, who have done well in the system. We're not filthy rich necessarily, but we're comfortable, and a lot of us are comfortable because of the filthy rich. Professors are in chairs given by the filthy rich, who might be perfectly reasonable people. I don't mean they're bad people, but we're a lot of academics are in schools. I'm in the Deshotel school. He was a nice man, Deshotel, but he gave $20 million to create our school. So I'm living off that. I'm comfortable because of that. The beleaguered don't get that benefit. The beleaguered are the people who can't pay their mortgages, can't deal with inflation, can't find health care. And sure, they're angry, so they elect Trump, which is the stupidest possible thing they ever could have done. But anyway, that's how they're expressing themselves.
So the question I have is what do we do in the interim? Us who are on board, who need to start shifting the pendulum towards the middle, as you say, towards that plural sector. How do we in some of our private sector organizations connect with the plural sector to start effecting change and relieve the beleaguered, if you will?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. But you have to eliminate the pressures that are blocking you. If you're on a board of a publicly traded corporation, then you got a bunch of kids with MBAs sort of telling the management what to do because they dipped in the last quarter. You know, this is no way to create a healthy society. If they're stuck with private enterprise and they're stuck with Kravitz or something, you know, what is serving on the board going to do? So what can we do as board members? Well, for one thing, get onto boards that are able to make changes. So you could be on boards with NGOs too. You could be on boards when you say private sector. Don't say the private sector. What about plural sector business? What about co-ops? What about there are all kinds of businesses that are true businesses. You can look up an article I did on my website about co-op Sapporo. I just spent, or a year ago, I spent some time with a co-op in the North Island of Japan, and the companies were leaving because they've got a bigger depopulation problem in Sapporo, in Hokkaido, the North Island, than other parts of Japan, and companies were leaving. So this co-op, which was running supermarket chains and all that, now does cradle to grave. They provide all kinds of services. They're a business. But listen to this if you want to hear something fascinating. People live in villages, older people live in villages in Hokkaido who can't get to banks or supermarkets. They don't have cars, they don't have much money, but they're comfortable in their little villages. So Co-op Sapporo sends out vans, and the vans pull up. We followed a van and watched it happen. A van pull ups. Maybe I have that in the Caribbean too. I don't know. And the vans pull up, open their doors, and they become little supermarkets. And this little old woman comes out of her house and walks up and does her shopping. And then the clerk in the van carries her stuff back, helps her carry her stuff back home. But listen to this, they can't get banks. So Co-op Sapporo has put ATM machines in their grocery vans. Okay? This is an example of what business can do.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Mintzberg. Thank you, Emile, Jerry, Vanessa, and David. For me, what I take away from this conversation is that we need to find ourselves on boards of the plural society, of the plural sector, where we can begin making a difference.
Yeah.
It's not just the private sector or the public sector, but that as Professor Mintzberg said, that plural sector, the community sector. So thank you for that. Kamla, this has been very, very interesting. I hope everybody else agrees. So I'll now hand over to you because I see it's almost 7 p.m.
Exactly.